This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your other host, Michaela Anne. If you are a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back. If you are brand new, thank you as well for checking us out.
If you are new, a little bit about this show, it's not your typical music podcast where guests will come on and talk about their latest record or a tour they're about to be on or any kind of publicity. We called it the Other 22 Hours because we'd like to focus on the hours that we as musicians are not on stage and talk to our guests about the routines and the tools that they've found to keep inspiration and creativity in their lives while they're trying to build a career around their art.
Between the two of us, Aaron and I have almost 25 years of experience in the music business. I've worked at labels, been a music educator, and spent the better part of the last decade writing, recording, releasing my own records and touring around the world.
And I started making records with friends in high school and spent a bunch of years on the road with different bands and also spent years teaching in public schools in New York City. And now I spend most of my time right here in my studio and in other studios around Nashville working on and producing records.
So essentially, we are lifers. We have no plan B. And we've learned over the years that there is no one right way to build a career based on your passion.
And in an industry like the music industry, where so much is out of our control and left up to luck and who you know and being in the right place at the right time, we decided that we wanted to shift the focus onto things that are within our control. Our creativity, our tools for staying sane as we build these careers, or just create in general. And so with that, we decided to invite our friends on and ask them about all the other times that are normally outside of the public eye and ask them the question, what do you do to create sustainability so that you can sustain your creativity? And the friend that we invited this week is Becca Mancari.
We've known Becca probably since we very first moved to Nashville about 8 years ago, and we have had the privilege of watching her grow as an artist. She's put out 2 great records, Good Woman and The Greatest Part. She's been in a band called Bermuda Triangle with Alabama Shake's Britney Howard. She has worked and performed with Hayley Williams from Paramore. She is an activist and very outspoken on her platform, advocating for LGBTQ community. And she just has a really wonderful heart, and we are so happy to get to dig in with her today.
This episode will probably air in late May, but we are recording it now at the end of March. So the current climate here in Nashville, last week we had the Love Rising concert at Bridgestone Arena, which was a gathering of some really incredible artists to raise awareness and raise funds for LGBTQ community and support organizations. And then at the beginning of this week was the unfortunate shooting in Nashville. So the air here is a little different than when this episode will air. And so we started with that in mind, and you'll hear us reference Love Rising, and that is a really amazing concert that we will link to in the show notes to this episode.
So we covered a lot of topics with Becca. It was a really interesting conversation. We talked a lot about learning and embracing how easy and surprisingly simple self-care can actually be, replacing old coping mechanisms with new ones that are learned through therapy and help from community.
And we also touched on wholeheartedly taking control of your creative process, explicitly around making a record and really shifting your focus on making a record of where you are currently as an artist and having the measure of success be how pure of an artistic statement you're making for who you are and where you are right now in the world. And we also had a really interesting conversation about shifting your perception of praise from one of validation, where I need this, I need to be validated for what I'm doing, to one of affirmation, where you receive as, thank you, that is where I am, I appreciate you seeing me.
And without further ado, here is our episode with Becca Mancari. Thank you so much for being here and being willing to chat with us. To start, just how are you? Because this will come out probably in May.
Yeah,
or
like the
June.
second half of May, this will come out. So it'll be a little bit of a different world, but we were just talking about it. Last week we had Love Rising at Bridgestone, which you were part of. And then this week starts with the shooting at Covenant School. So how are you doing?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I still am not able to process fully. Last week, like you said, Love Rising was such a high. It was so amazing. And also, it did feel like, I think we all agreed that no matter what, though, there was still this overarching feeling of this isn't enough. There were a couple pretty amazing Unreal artists that were there that said, I tried to get other artists to come out and support this because of how important it is. And because everything is politicized now, there were people that decided not to come that would have been a huge asset. We still raise a lot of money, but there's an overarching playing a game of what will serve themselves sometimes. What I loved about that event was that you could tell people were like, no, I'm giving my time. I'm not getting paid for this. I'm spending hours here. I mean, we were at the Bridgestone from like 3 p.m. till like 11 p.m. We were there all day. And these are some like artists of a generation that were giving their time. That felt like amazing. I'm queer, you know, I'm non-binary. For me, like, of course, I'd be there. That's my life. But having these other people come and be a part of it who are just allies was like unbelievable. So I guess to answer your question, how am I doing? You know, when the shooting happened, of course, horrible. Like I was actually going to do an interview. Like Maria, my partner, walked in and was like, did you hear what happened? And I was just like, oh my God, no. And then as the day went on, you're already numb. These are children. It's just awful. And then having it, the shooter be somebody in my community was just like worst case scenario. It's like there's nobody that is a trans friend of mine or a non-binary friend of mine that isn't like scared for their lives, honestly, at this point. I would include myself in that in some ways. It's just awful. That's how I'm doing.
Yeah. It's hard to put into words. We're right there with you.
The fact that the shooter appeared to be presenting as trans in the state of Tennessee, I mean, in the United States of America, that of course then the conservative, extreme right wing is going to have a field day with that and just double down on the attacks that are already happening. And, you know, I was thinking about the school shooting this week. Our daughter is 21 months and she just started going to a little preschool in January. Yeah. So we do drop off and pick up. And I have always been incredibly emotional and empathetic for every issue in the world and have felt things pretty intensely. But now that I have a child in school and can imagine now in a very real way what it would be like to not be able to see her anymore, obviously the trauma of that, but then the motivation to do something feels that much more intense, which then I think about all of these things that we're having to fight for right now and have for many years, but that feels like really a kind of a fever pitch, especially living in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Is that feeling of going back to Love Rising, of like people who are just allies who might not have the specific daily impact of these attacks. I'm not going out into the world afraid that I'm going to be attacked because I'm a target, because I'm a white cisgendered woman. I have other things to be concerned about, but I don't have that fear of I'm going to be a target because I'm trans or queer. But I do feel the intensity of I have a child that's in school. So I'm long-winded and a roundabout way of getting to the point of like, I think one of the things that's important is how we use our art to communicate our stories and other people's stories to try and create more empathy so that we do feel that same motivation to want to get up and go to a protest for a cause that might not directly impact me today, for people that exist in the world that maybe I don't even know anyone that's like them, but I feel like art is a big aspect of that. And I know that your work and your music often speaks to your experience as a queer, non-binary person and your experience of coming out. And I was wondering how much that relationship to your work can feel motivating and inspiring, but also if it ever feels burdensome and exhausting, and like, wouldn't it be nice if this didn't have to be a part of everything?
Yeah, you've said so many good things. It's interesting, I thought today about what you said. I'm not a parent, you know, I don't know if I ever will be a parent. And I think about my friends though, and I was telling my partner, you know, we need to show up for parents just as much as we show up for the queer community, because it means so much when people come to Pride or come to, you know, rally for us. It's like we're all in this together. And if anything I've seen for the past 2 weeks is that like we are all affected each other and our actions. And I think for me, getting back to the music, I always feel like, yes, my story is deeply rooted in my songs, but I feel like people from all walks of life love my music for different reasons, or more similar reasons than you would think. I think because I'm talking about the human experience of pain. We've all experienced pain. I don't care who you are on either side of the equation. And I feel like the root of it is pain finding love in joy, when grief and joy, like they hold hands. As I get older, I really believe that now, where when I was younger, I was just like, the world's against me. I'm a fighter, like I'm an underdog. Everybody's out to get me. And as I've changed my thinking through therapy, through things that I didn't do up until like 2020, honestly. I can't believe I've survived this long, to be fair. My friends would say, yeah, Becca, you weren't doing that great. We saw you. We saw you. And I think now that I experience life where I see, like, again, joy and grief holding hands, I don't think there'll be a time where those two things aren't in my life. And accepting that has really like given me some kind of refuge, I want to call it, or like some kind of peace to be like, 1 week I'll be on a high and 1 week I will be absolutely at my lowest. And how do I like grapple with those things? For me, oftentimes that has been through music. And I feel like that music, I think, is why I have a job, because people know that feeling, like this elation of being like your fullest self, and then also this absolute depression of, I think a lot of our voices aren't heard, and we're all reaching out for love at the core of us.
Yeah, that's so well said. I'm cisgendered white male, and so I can take a time machine to any point in history and I'm generally fine. And the existential crisis that I feel through dropping my kid at school, and the real possibility that like maybe I won't pick her up, is a new experience for me. And I have felt both ends of the spectrum, where it's been like 3 different prongs, I would say. It feels paralyzing. It feels very inspiring and motivating. Relating this back to creativity, it also feels like I want to step into my work to kind of escape in a way. And I'm just wondering what your experience is in relation to creating through your upbringing to who you are now and your evolution through that like struggle and in times of crisis. Is that inspiring to you? Or is it paralyzing in the moment and inspiring later? Or what is your experience with that?
I would say this week I can speak to that. I had a photo shoot that I was supposed to do yesterday and I did cancel because I just was like, I physically feel like I can barely like function, to be fair, So it can be that. It just depends. If I'm in a place where I have a lot of support, we talk about like therapy, we talk about self-care. I didn't experience any of those things until, like I said, very recently, where I didn't have any coping mechanisms other than like being sad, drinking, trying to find affirmation through what I did. Those were like my 3 target things. And now that I've cut a lot of those things out, I hope that I'm creating art at a different place almost. I used to believe, again, which a lot of artists do, that you have to have gone through something terrible to create. And to be fair, I don't know if I would have been the musician I am without how I was raised. Like I went through so much early trauma, religious trauma, which if you're familiar with that, it's a deep, I don't know if we can swear on this podcast, but
you can.
Go for it.
Oh, it's a mind fuck, man. A deep one. One of the deepest ones that I didn't realize how far that was inside of me. I keep referencing this, but I don't know if you've seen this movie. It's called Women Talking.
I haven't yet.
It's amazing. I mean, it feels like it's like a play. There's a lot of monologue, and it's basically all these women talking about how they're going to get out and leave the male, like dominant religious group that are their husbands that have been abusing them unknowingly. They figured this out. And it was crazy because, like, not to go too deep into my childhood, I just grew up around women like that. Like, I grew up in very rural Pennsylvania, and I actually went to a Brethren school when I was a kid, which most people don't know what that is even, but it's almost like Amish school. They drive cars and they like have electricity, but they can't wear certain colors. Like you can't wear the color red. I remember my big sister wore a red sweater into school and like she was called like a harlot. It was just like extreme religion. Like I didn't wear pants till I was 16. Like I wasn't allowed to dress like a man. I don't know what my life would have been like without all those things. It's really hard for me to look back and be like, what would have my music been? What would have been my motivation? I think as I've gotten older, it's more like nuanced than just that. Thankfully, like I love music and I think I'm pretty good at it. And I think like that's my gift. And like I want to not only get better at who I am, but I want to get better at my craft. That's so important to me in a newer way because I have the capacity. Before I was just always in survival mode and I had no more capacity. Like I could write a good song and that was it. Like I couldn't pour more into playing guitar even or just like learning how to produce. And things that like bring me true joy and I think freedom, because knowledge is power. And I really believe that. And I think I'm so passionate about that now because I stepped into more of a producer role for this newest work that I'm doing. And it's just like a light bulb went off. I'm like, we have to have the capacity. If we don't have the capacity, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't get deeper in our work. We just can't.
Can you share what some of the new coping mechanisms are that you've learned and what taking care of yourself looks like?
It's really small, simple things. I drink a lot of tea at night. It sounds so silly because it's so small. And like, I remember laughing at people when they'd be like, yeah, I take a bath. I was just like, a bath? Does that really help? Wow, shocker. Epsom salt really does help. Like,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I looked at people like that and I thought there was an amount of weakness. Like I thought self-care was weakness. And I actually think I was taught that in a lot of ways. Like no shade to my mom. My mom grew up poor. Like people don't understand. She literally, when we were kids, we drove by where she lived. She's like, oh, I used to live there. And I was like, Mom, that's like a factory. What are you talking about? And she was like, oh, well, we had this little place in the back where we lived. And so now as I've realized, like, I was raised by a Puerto Rican mom, and how she was raised was survive, be tough, work really hard, keep going, don't rest. It's just a privilege, you know? And so again, I thought therapy, baths, tea were all white people stuff, to be honest. I was like, that's what yoga, like that. I was like, okay, like that's not really for us.
Yeah.
A catalyst was my little sister. She just went through like so much self-work and became like a yogi. Like she's like a yoga instructor in Asheville. That was pretty amazing to see also. Like she's more brown presenting than I am. And like, it was just so cool to see her step into that space. And again, like it speaks to like a cultural thing too. There's a studio in town called Ola run by a woman of color. And she hires so many people of color to be instructors there. It's so amazing. And I feel like for me, my goal is to like destigmatize things for people in myself. Even I'm like, again, like going back to we better ourselves to better the world. And I do believe that now. Like it starts with me. Like I can only control this one thing. I can't control what everybody else does, but I can control that I go to sleep at night so I don't have a nasty temper the next day, you know, like I'm not hungover all the time. Like I go on tour and we have a dry green room because, you know, one of my players is sober now, and that's amazing. For me, like I spent months being sober from everything, and it was incredible. And I realized, thankfully, until further notice, I don't have alcoholism as a disease. I had it as a coping mechanism. And that was a big shift too for me, where I was like, I don't want it. I can do something else to make me happy, like go on a walk with my dog.
Yeah. Something as simple as that. I went through the same kind of realization a few years ago. I was raised the same way. Both my mom and my dad are like very hard workers, very much like keep your head down, do the work, keep grinding it out essentially. And I didn't feel that growing up. I'm like, oh, this is just the way it is. And so that's how I approach everything. And full disclaimer, still do in a lot of ways. But because it takes so much effort to grind it out and work and stay at it and like push through like all of this discomfort and all of that, the gentleness of self-care felt weak to me, just like you were saying.
Yeah.
Like, wait, this is it? The strength it took to break out of that inertia of, oh, I'll just smoke a joint, or, oh, I'm just going to drink 5 tequilas because that's easy and I'm working hard and it's hard. And then I wake up and I'm hungover, but that's life. Life is hard.
Yep.
It'd be like,
life is hard is like a
common theme. Yeah. Ingrained.
Yeah. But the gentleness of just like, I'm not going to have a drink. I'm just going to have a soda water and still hang out with my friends. And it's like super easy. It was just a foreign concept to me. So I hear you. And I hear what you're saying about having capacity now. It's like, oh. So
well, it's
all
also
of this space.
In American culture, self-care has become such a cliche and probably like pop trendy word. And to what you said about thinking it was like white people stuff, which makes complete sense, because also these things, other than taking a bath and drinking tea, but like going to a yoga class or getting massages or having some body work done, it all costs so much money.
Yeah.
And in America, so much of our class system is still very deeply ingrained in our racial structure, which is also, you know, yoga is not a white person thing. It's been, does not start with white people.
That's just that.
But it says something to like the greater societal messages we get in our country of it is such a luxury to take care of yourself and not a necessity. it's completely understandable to internalize this feeling of it's a weakness if I need to have a night where I like pamper myself, which really is like, I need some calm. I need some soothing, quiet. I need things that are good for my body. And we're really trying to focus these conversations with people who've been in this for a bit. The age demographic is like at least into your 30s and older for the most part. And I feel like so many people who've been at least through a few cycles of promoting records and touring a bunch, a lot of people come at some point to a conclusion of, oh, doing what is kind of the norm is actually not really healthy for me. And substance abuse issues, even if it's not like a severe problem, but having to take time off, like that comes up for so many people. I don't know if I can think of one person in music that I haven't talked to at least briefly about our relationship to alcohol and drugs, because it's so prevalent in our work.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started out, right? Like most of us were playing for beer. We didn't get paid. It's just so part of the culture of, okay, kids, like, here you go, get fucked up. Like, that's your reward, like, and at the time, like, I was like, I would love a drink right now and I'd love to not pay for it,
Yeah.
That's broke as shit.
It's also how we all met. It's where our community was based. A bunch of musicians weren't hanging out at the park at 10 a.m. like, getting to know each other. A lot of our guests so far on this, I'm pretty sure we met at the 5 Spot.
I'm sure we did. Yeah.
Yeah, it checks out.
We met at the 5 Spot, or like I feel like the early days we maybe met at Margot's house.
Yeah. And that was a great wholesome night, right? That is a great memory of, of course we all drank a lot, I'm sure, back then. Even still, but I feel like as we continue, and that's the goal, right? Like to not burn out. Burnout is a big word that I've noticed for myself for the first time recently. Like, I know that I felt that before. I know that when I was touring nonstop in like 2018, I was in Europe maybe like 3 months out of a year. Like, and I was doing Europe the wrong way. Like I was driving myself and I was in like 17 countries in 30 days. It was just to the point where I remember opening for Julian Baker, and that was one of those tours where I was driving and she had a bunch of people helping, so it was like a different experience and we were like trailing them kind of thing. And so I come back home for like 3 weeks and then I go back over with a whole team, like my band. And I think we didn't sleep for like 48 hours and then we played a show and we were in the Netherlands, and I remember it was such a bad show too. It was just so awful. We got bed bugs at that place too that night. No. It was just awful. But I remember that night being like, I think it would be better if I walked into traffic and got so hurt that they would have to send me home.
Oh my God.
That I was like a soldier that was like, I'm gonna like shoot my hand. Like, don't play with me right now. I'm leaving this shit.
Yeah. But you think that's the only way? What needs to happen to get to the next stop and like eventually
you'll be rewarded,
or eventually get to the point that somebody's gonna be like, okay, here you go, you passed the finish line, now it's easy,
you passed the test, there you go.
And it doesn't even have to be going to Europe. I think people see that a lot here. They think that there is a line that you cross that all of a sudden everybody's gonna be like, here you go, now it's easy, and now you do this and everybody's gonna take care of it for you. And it's like, no, you have to actively make these changes and make these decisions to make your career comfortable, because it's just going to keep going.
Unfortunately, yeah. I think so.
Well, unless you do that work to pull the brakes and slow down a little bit and reassess and approach it in a different way. It's like, okay, you're selling out the 5 Spot, and then you're selling out Mercy Lounge, rest in peace, and then you're selling out the Ryman, and then next is like Bridgestone, but you're selling out Bridgestone, but you're not selling out Nissan Stadium. When does it stop?
It doesn't, yeah.
It is never too early to just take a minute and be like, oh, I deserve to be comfortable. No matter what perceived level you are at, or no matter what your contract says that you're provided backstage, like you can be like, no, this is what I need. This is.
Yeah. That question of, well, am I successful enough to deserve these things and not suffer in this way? And deciding, okay, well, maybe I can't sell as many tickets as I think I should to be able to like say, no, I don't want to do that tour. And getting to a point in life where you're like, actually it doesn't matter, because I'm just going to decide that I don't want to do that tour or I don't want to do it that way, or I don't want to believe in this transaction, because the transaction of if you suffer long enough or if you pay your dues long enough, then you'll be rewarded and it will get easier. It's not guaranteed. You know, I've seen some friends who've been touring for over 20 years and are like, I don't know if this has gotten any better than when I first started out. And how come that person over there is 19 and they're touring immediately on a bus and comfortable and might not ever have to experience this stuff? Shifting the mindset of how do you design what you want to do based on your own decisions and not out of this imaginary transaction of what you think you need to do to get what you want.
Oh, this is tough. This is like a great conversation because I feel like we all have choices to make and they're all right for the person. Like, it's okay. Like, I think that I struggled a lot when I saw some friends seemingly stop. Going back to Aaron, like, just being like, well, what do you mean? Like, you can't stop. You gotta keep going. And like, I would think like maybe they were sad about that choice, or I would judge it and be like,
you're giving up.
You're giving up.
Yeah.
Like, how can you give up? You're so good. Or like,
That's
how
weak.
can you, in like the darker parts of me, yes, I judge that, you know. I think more I would be like sad, and I'd be sad for them. Oh my God, you gave up. I'm so sorry. Like, you must be so sad. And then I realized, I was like, wait, what if they're really happy? Like, what if they're doing great? Like, what if they're like, fuck you, Becca. Like, I'm actually having a great life. Hope you're having fun out there. Like, keep going, kid. Like, you know, there wasn't even a thing that like sparked that. It was just like my own spirit that was just, wake up. That's not yours to decide. And that's not yours to judge. And it's only yours to be a friend, to be like, hey, I just hope you're doing so well. I've had friends be like, I don't think they want to give up though. And I'm like, how again can you build a life that makes sense for you? I don't think it's an and/or. Like, I don't think it's an all in, all out. And I struggle with that still, by the way, because I do feel like for most of my career, I've been like, it's all in. You have to be like so thirsty and like can't ever stop. And I think what's the common thing? We talked about substances and the pandemic. That's like the two things that we all experienced pretty similarly. And I think for me, like, without the pandemic, something was going to stop me. And it probably would have been like alcohol and like a DUI, to be honest. Like, I don't know, something terrible. But the pandemic, as cliche as it sounds, was my stopping point, where it was just like, nope, you got to sit on this couch and you got to face yourself and you got to like yourself without all this. Yeah. And it was really hard. It wasn't okay. I know y'all suffered too. And I know you went through so much with your mom, and my mom like had cancer and like that just like really derailed me for all of 2021, to be honest. I was gone. So yeah, I don't know. Like, when you said that thing about the 19-year-old thing too, it's funny. It's like, we can never go back to being 19. But we also didn't have TikTok then. We didn't have the resources that some of these artists have right now. And I can't look at it like a competition in that way, because I'm like, you didn't have it, Becca. Like, it's okay. Like, maybe you would have had the same thing, but you just had what you had, and it was a different time.
Yeah. Honestly, though, I think, thank God I didn't have any of that stuff when I was a teenager.
I would have said something so stupid, right?
I relate deeply, though, to what you were saying about like when you've seen friends stop and feel that kind of like sad for them, or if you're being darkly honest, pity or like judgment. I feel shame for it, but I remember like being young in my 20s and like seeing different people at different stages in their lives and careers and having no concept of what this life was like, and thinking, all right, I'm not going to be where they're at that age. I'm going to be like past that. What past that even means, I don't know. But I think then when you spend so much of your time, like you said, so thirsty, and you're like, everything has to be about this career, friends' weddings or friends' children's births, family events.
Missed everything.
Well, I got shows. Yeah. This is everything, because that's what you have to do. And then when it stops, like with the pandemic and like what you said, family stuff, I also was like, okay, the pandemic took it away. And then my mom had a stroke and I had a baby. And I thought so much, I'm going to get back to my career and then I'll feel normal again. Then everything will be back on track and I'll feel like myself again, because nothing in my life feels recognizable. And it's been a pretty bumpy start back into my career world, and it's messed with my self-identity a lot. I was so like, I have to get back on tour as much as possible because that's who I was. And Aaron had already made the shift of saying, I don't think I want to tour in the way that I used to. I want to create music here in my studio and like shift gears. And I was like, no, I'm a road dog. I go out 6 weeks at a time because I'm so tough. That was so deeply ingrained. And only now am I really thinking like, oh, if I don't play as many shows as I used to, that doesn't inherently make me less successful or less of a member of the music community or less of a professional. There's so much more to life that's really wonderful to experience that you can experience if you spend all of your time traveling from town to town. That's not to dig people who still, that's their favorite thing in the world to do. But I think I had such a one-track mind of if I made any concessions to thinking there's more than just this, then I'm giving up. And then everyone else is going to judge me and I'm not going to be in the club anymore.
That's real. Yeah.
It's so hard to then decide, what decisions am I making for what's really good for me and my family? And what decisions am I making based on all of these imaginary conversations or things that I think other people are saying or thinking about me? And like this incessant need to feel accepted by all these people that I can't even name.
Yeah, they're figments of imagination, right? At the end of the day, like everybody's mostly thinking about themselves, to be fair. Like,
Exactly.
To be fair, we're all just thinking about what we're feeling, or what somebody might perceive about me. Like,
exactly
not the other way.
Yeah, what you're feeling, but in disguise as somebody else.
Yeah.
Or in disguise as somebody else's actions. It's like, oh, that's actually my thoughts on myself. Because I, too, have felt sad for friends that are like, no, I'm not touring anymore. Or, again, in the darker thing, like, oh, they're giving up. But I've realized there's a part of me that's like, that sounds really nice. What if I did just get a job that I went to 5 days a week and then got a paycheck on Friday? And then I just went home and I just like lived. Maybe, I played a show here or there with friends, got my place on Rigs of Dad Instagram page or whatever it is. But like, I was like, oh, that feeling of pity for my friends that were stepping back because that was what was good for them was like actually my own desire in disguise as this friend.
Of that pull of maybe there's an easier way to live than the life that we've chosen based on what we do feel is our calling or our gift or our passion, but how we build a life around it is what can cause a lot of struggle and pain and hardship. Hence this podcast. How to have both, how to build a good life based on creating.
Yeah. And so for me, the realization, I guess you could say prior to the pandemic, but I was already shifting towards this kind of lifestyle. The pandemic just like called my bluff and was like, cool, here you go. Like, if you really want to do it, here you go. But for me, it was, I was more of a side man. I was not a front person. But for me, I realized like, oh, it's creating. It's like the actual act of creation that I like. So how do I do that more? And that was being here in my studio. That was writing with people more. That was producing more records. And live music is amazing. It's a really unique art form. You can have a great band and a horrible audience and it sucks. You can have a horrible band and a great audience and it sucks. That feeling of a great band and a great audience is such a unique experience and such a great power. And I love that. But for me, being on the road is like, I only do this like 2 hours a day. When I'm in my studio, I'm creating like 8 to 12 hours a day and I like get to really be in that. And that's what mattered to me. So my change was stepping back and like, okay, what do I need to shift in my life and my approach to just be able to create more? And the heavy lifting was disconnecting from how my art was perceived and how I was perceived, which is, as I witness being with Michaela for so long, is really hard when you're releasing records and you're on tour. There's so much of the business that is just outside of your control entirely. It's been a lot of heavy lifting for me and I'm not great at it still, but every day I try to be a little bit better of focusing on what I do have within my control, which is, did I create more songs this year than last year? Or am I closer to what I hear in my head than I was last year?
You mentioned that earlier of one of your coping mechanisms was being sad, drinking, and then I think you said getting affirmation from what I do. And what you said, in reality, people aren't even thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. But I'll take it a step further, that I feel I've been programmed of like, that's even more painful when nobody's thinking about you.
Well, that's because you're a performer.
Not when they're judging you, but when they're like, who? I'm not even.
Yeah.
So how has your relationship to gaining affirmation and feeling fulfillment or confidence or whatever from the response that you get from what you make?
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm like literally in the thick of it right now. I'm about to put out a new record. I'm like working on so many different aspects of it again. Like I feel like I'm doing the calls, the conversations, the game, whatever. But the person that sees me the most is my partner. And she is like, poor thing. I mean, I need to be in therapy again. I lost my therapist because she was always going to transition to being a child's therapist. She's like an angel. So I haven't had like a consistent therapy person. So I'm like putting that on Maria too much, which is, the thing we do.
We understand.
Yeah.
Totally. Gotta get that therapist. Essential. But, I think like she sees that in me. Like I've always struggled with affirmation from people pleasing is my like deepest Achilles heel. And like if somebody else says it's good, I'm like, it's good. Yeah, you're right. And so for me, to answer your question, I think because I took the role of producing myself, and not just alone, I had one as my co-producer who's literally amazing. But because I stepped into that role and I like ultimately was the captain of my own ship, musically even, I could say to myself, you did everything you could. You had the final call, Becca, on what was done. I had the final call on when the mix was done. Becca, is the mix done? The mix is done. Okay, moving on. Becca, is the album cover right? Yep. Is it your vision? Yes. Moving on. I finally believe me. And that to me changes everything. Like the game is different now where I'm like, oh, like I know what I did is great. Period. Before, after, in between. Anything else is just a little cherry, but it doesn't define me anymore. And like, I know that that's going to be a battle. Like, listen, I've already been like, I don't know if I want to read any reviews, even if they're good. Like, I'm just not sure right now. Maybe that's not for me this time. But what it is for me is it takes a mind shift. Everything is so mental in our lives. We are so controlled by this thing. And it can be in a positive or in a negative way. And what you speak over yourself matters. And I think for years, I'd always, like I said, I'm an underdog. The world's against me. The universe like doesn't have my back. And when I started shifting my language and being like, oh, the universe loves me. It's conspiring with me. It's got my back. I am not alone. I'm not an underdog. This has been like the shift of a lifetime for me. And I feel like when I was able to do that, when people responded in a positive way, it was great, but it wasn't like what it was before, where it was like, I needed that. It was just like, thanks. Yeah, I know. And that is life-changing. That's when you start getting in your own power and like the job is sustainable. Without that, this job potentially is really harmful.
Yeah. I would be so curious to talk to you again like a year after this record comes out.
Me too.
That sounds really dark. Yeah, cool. We'll see how this album's...
Good luck.
Yeah, we'll talk to you after the album cycle. Heard that before.
Been there, bitch. You got great songs. Been there.
Yeah, cool. Life-changing moment. It's been a big change. Yeah, good luck. Yeah, we'll see you
in a year.
No. I mean it with a lot of love and obviously also a lot of positive hope for you. But because I relate to so much of what you say all the time, but like that experience of taking back ownership of what you think is good, I felt like I went through all that process with the pandemic. We produced my last record together at home, and it was such a big step for me to do that with Aaron because we've been together 15 years and I really realized Aaron doesn't count as an outside person to me. We've been together since we were kids. So like him telling me something good is, I don't believe it. Like he's part of me. So I need some outside person to make me and my music better. That's been a very deep, long struggle for me that I still struggle with. And this is the point of the story. I felt like I really got somewhere with it during the pandemic and creating my last record, Oh to Be That Free. And I was like, we did it together. I loved everything about it. I designed the package. I picked things like the photo is like a really far away photo of me that's not focusing on my vanity or my physical image. Everything was like very intentional. Leading up to the release, I was pregnant and in the hospital for 3 months with my mom who had a massive stroke, and like my whole world changed. I felt like my perspective shifted and I was like, all of this shit in the music industry and attention is such bullshit. This stuff we spend so much time being concerned about is such bullshit. And I felt so free of it. But then my record came out. It came out 2022, there were a million records coming out, and touring was still really rough, and I didn't have a super present person on my team that was a vital person on my team, and there were disappointing things about the album campaign. Granted, also, I've had this conversation so many times with friends who then also are from social media, it seemed like you had such a successful year, and you played Bonnaroo and played Hardly Strictly and did all these great tours, and I'm like, yeah, but behind the scenes, it felt like a failure based on the last record. In some pockets, some people, journalists who were big supporters of mine in the past, didn't touch it. Nobody said anything about it. I literally had a person on my team have a really negative feedback about how the campaign went. So I created this narrative in my head of, oh, I guess I was wrong. And it twisted my mind so much because I felt like I got to such a positive place of not needing it. And then I couldn't differentiate, wait, what was good about all of this and what was a disappointment? Even the tangible things of I would have to list what my year looked like compared to my last record. I'm like, wow, all these things are notably better. But that radio DJ who loved my last record didn't like this record. Things that are just a natural given of when you're an artist who puts out many records and has a long career. But it warped my mind so much that I have had a really hard time since being wait, I thought I was in such a good place. And then that little bit set me so far back. And so I don't say this to be so Becca, you're gonna I say
Listen,
it to be
I'll tell you this, I've got a shield against that. I'm
yeah.
Nope, I've just been I just believe. And I believe because what you're saying, Kayla, I thank you for being so honest. I think it's really vulnerable and really difficult way of saying it. It can be triggering for me even because I feel I deeply know what you mean, but I also deeply want you to let go of that one little thing that twists your mind, because that is, again, our own worst enemy is ourselves usually. Those people that say bullshit stuff to you, it's just so off the cuff probably. They didn't even think how deeply their words can affect you. And I've got people that have said stuff to me where I wish this person would have gotten on board. And I've been what does that mean? Does that mean I'm not worthy? Does that mean I'm not good enough or I'm not able? And it was this when I was a kid. I was a believer in things. I had this hope. So much so that people would get annoyed at me. They'd be they're positive. Here we go. Life's great. I don't want to hear it. But I feel that to me, it's when you see an old person that looks young, where you're damn, I like you. You're hold on a second. You're incredible. I want to be around you. Because we're just fed so much this idea, again, we're at a time limit. Unless you're at this age, you're not viable. And it's the older people that say, no, that's not true. I'm viable at any age. I'm amazing. I'm sexy. I'm fucking cool. We believe them.
Yeah.
We believe them. The energy around them just draws it into you. A good example is I was bummed that I wasn't asked to play the Love Rising show as me. I saw it come out and I was just hello, I'm an activist. I'm a gay. What do you mean? And then I was just you know what, Becca, it's really cool that they're doing that show. No matter what, that's great. And I love my friends that are playing it. That's so amazing. And I'm not trying to be woo-woo, but I think with the next day, Hayley texted me and was hey, I want you to play guitar for me. And it was intentional because she just knew. She didn't say this ever, but I know she meant this. You should have been asked. They asked me, but you should be part of it. And let me give you this platform. And I just feel right now, if I don't think that, nothing will ever change for me. My story will be the same thing over and over again. And I think as people who grew up, because I grew up really poor, I grew up really we're never going to break the poverty cycle. My parents are still poor. They're better than they have been, but they're still poor. They don't help me. I never have, as an adult. And to me, I am my own champion now. I am my own person. And if I can keep that, yeah, let's do it in a year from now because that's a challenge even.
Well,
let's go.
My point of sharing that is in the realization that it's not just, okay, I'm cured now. That I really thought, okay, the things that I let contribute to my own mental suffering over all these years of doing this, I'm done with them. And I really felt that. I'm over it. I'm a new person. And then I had all this backsliding, and it really has made me realize this is just a lifelong journey. And it's the constant work of I don't go to therapy for 6 months and then I'm good for the rest of my life. It's like, no, I have to recenter myself in my integrity, my practices, my belief systems, how I want to behave, and all of that, like every single day.
Yeah.
What's his name? The psychiatrist, Phil Stutz.
Okay.
There's a documentary about him that Jonah Hill made.
Oh,
on
yes.
Netflix.
It's great.
Yeah. And he says, I'll have to look it up. The constant truths in life is like, do you remember? I feel
Was
like
it suffering or I
one
wrote
is
it down too.
Is constant work is part of it.
That's something that I think about a lot, is that we think that, existence is a straight line when really it's a squiggle for sure, but it's kind of a helix. Like you come back to the same things, it just looks a little different, but it's the same meat. You're coming up on releasing another record, and there's going to be a lot that's the same, but there's going to be a lot that's different. Is how do you approach it in a new way? It brings me a lot of joy to hear how grounded you are in your record and what you've made, because as a producer, that's what I try to impress upon the artists that I work on a lot. I'm like, it's called a record for a reason. It's a record of where you are as an artist, and the world needs to hear that. And the records that I love the most are so grounded in who that artist was, and it's so pure in their intention and in their voice. It's not trying to be something else. And to me, that's what makes a record last. That's what makes a Bowie record that he recorded in 1968 move me today, is because he was like, this is where I am, this is what I'm doing. Be real, be true, and then own that fully as much as you can. And that is the success. If you can step into like owning it and being true and clear in your statement, that's incredibly powerful.
Oh man, I just got chills because like, listen, Aaron, that's what somebody said to me that shifted me too. Halfway through the record, I was having a crisis. Like I was like, oh my God, like did I like mess up? There's a whole other story of how that happened, but that's for another time. But my friend, I was just like, I called him and I was just like, what do you think? Should I get this person on board? Should you come on board? What if I'm messing up? And he was just like, whoa, make the record of who you are right now, not who you want to be 10 years from now, because you will make that record someday. But that's not what is in your capacity right now. Like make the record that you have the capacity to make right now. And that is going to be amazing, Becca, because it just captures that moment. And like someday you'll do something else and you'll get better, because that's the goal. That's what keeps you hungry. That's what keeps you alive in this job, is being like, oh, next time I'm going to use those kind of drums because I now get it. I want that sound. It's okay. It's not on this record. That's coming. This record is what it's supposed to be for right now. That's what gets me off. Like, or I'm just like, I got all the hope in the world if I can keep having the strength and having the ability to say, I know that there are going to be people that pass on this record, or like they won't like it, or they'll be like, why did you do a pop song, Becca? Like always like, why did you change your sound again? I'm like, because I'm going to be an artist that does that. I will never be the artist that doesn't. I mean, it's probably career suicide, but it's just what I choose to do. It's just what interests me.
Those are the artists I love, who make a different record every time, because they're people. So they consume different music throughout their life and have different inspirations. So, I mean, I always go back to Linda Ronstadt. It's one of my favorites. She has a million different genres.
So amazing. Yeah, once you sing in Spanish, I'm just like mind blown. Traditional, Mexican music. I'm like, okay, you can do everything.
Yeah, exactly. The two of you as singer-songwriters have this unique gift of being able to put into words your experience in the world that it is today. And as a listener, that's an amazing thing to be able to witness. And it's a sculpture in a way. You're building a sculpture of the way your experience is in the world today, or the last 6 months that you've been working on the record. And that will exist longer than you will. And that'll be there for people in the future. And then the next record you make is the helix. You're back in the same place of making a record, but you have a different perspective. You have a different approach. And
I looked up Phil Stutz. Says that people who accept that life is made up of pain, uncertainty, and constant work are better equipped and essentially happier. So those three things: pain, uncertainty, and constant work. Accepting that those three things are just a part of life.
Let's go. Accept it. We started this conversation, joy and grief, holding hands. Accept that.
Yeah, exactly. That came to mind when you guys were talking about releasing a record and having one intent in mind. And then as the response starts to roll in and how that changes.
Letting it shift you.
Yeah, letting it shift you. But, I feel like you approach it so strongly, and then we're all human. And so the response, maybe it's not what we expected. That hurts. There's ego, there's feelings. Writing a song and singing it and recording it and putting it out in the world is an extremely vulnerable form of art. And so I think it's human to be hurt by response or lack of or whatever it is. But I think what can be dangerous is then letting that trigger a shame spiral. You're like, this is my record. This is where I'm at. I'm going to put it out and it's great. And I don't care about the response. I'm strong here. Perfect. Great. But also be aware that like your ego might step up and be like, well, why is it not getting more response? And that's okay too.
Nobody cares about all my emotions right now.
Yeah. And like, I want to say like that slip is okay. I think it's really detrimental to be like, no, I'm going to be strong. And then when you do have those feelings to then feedback and
Feel
lose the grip.
shameful for having those very human emotions.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I feel like I've been facing my humanness a lot recently where I'm like, nah, Becca, like you slip into that a lot. And you know, something I think that he also said was in the documentary, you can't ever really get rid of those voices. Those voices will always be with you. They will live and die with you. And when I heard that, I was like, I feel like I've heard this before too. And I think a therapist has said this, like, you can't ever really get rid of intrusive thoughts. And first I was like, oh no, like that's horrible. Like, what do you mean? And then when I realized, no, like you can say, hey guys, like, you know, I know you're going to be here and I love you even. I accept that you're part of me, but you don't get to run me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what my therapist told me too. She was like, fear, you're accepted here, but you don't ever get to run this car. Like you just don't get to run it.
And I don't have to believe you.
Yeah, I don't have to believe you.
Yeah, you can be here, and I'm not going to feel bad about that, but I don't have to believe everything you're telling me right now. That's
100%.
big.
It's huge. It's a huge life shift. And like, listen, I never understood that before. I just was like, that's the truth. And I would just cling on to this and I'd cycle into it. And like my therapist recently was like, you know, you probably have a touch of OCD, Becca. Like, we're going to work on that. You know, there's a lot of things that are looping here right now that I see. And like, now that I have knowledge, more enlightenment of my own psyche, I'm not scared as much anymore. Like, I'm not as so, they're going to know, or I'm bad, or like this constant like war of just trying to like have a facade. I'm just like, no, I'm a person. I'm going to get older in front of you. That's really hard for me. Like getting older, watching my friends get older is like, what? It's crazy. Like, it's a crazy feeling. But now when I'm just like, well, that just is what it is. Like, you have to accept it. That's been a thing too, is like, face it. Look at the scary. I always have this dream where I can't open this one door in this house. It's like so typical. It's like, and I really have this dream. And I'm just like, Becca, that's because you can't face all the things in yourself. And if you can face them, the boogie is not there.
Yeah. There's so much power in knowledge and understanding of ourselves and therefore each other. We have so many of these kind of conversations behind closed doors. And then we all go on social media and share our highlights. And like you said, it's not as scary when you start understanding yourself, but also when you start understanding how not unique it is to feel these things and think these things, and that it's not only you that struggles with different thoughts or feelings or whatever, that we all do it. We just don't admit it that often to each other. So I think there's a lot of power. And what's the saying always? Mold grows in...
Yeah, mold grows in darkness is the idea of just opening that door and letting light on it. It might not fix it, but you're like, there it is, and it's there, and I'll keep that in front of me and be aware of that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I want to say like thank you all for asking me to do this and sharing with me too, because it like does help me not feel alone. It makes me feel understood in a way, and hopefully like we encourage each other by saying, I see you, I hear you. And I think we all just want the best for each other, which is like, that's the purest form. You're talking about our darkest form, which is like envy or pity or whatever. But I think our purest form, our deepest form, and actually our truest form is we love each other. And like, we want the other person to be well and happy, however that is, however that makes you happy, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else, amazing. That will make the world a better place. That's where I'm getting to as an adult, where I'm like, oh my God, like, if we can do that, what a joy it is to be doing this job instead of what a pain. That's, again, perspective. Like, when I look at it like that, I get moments of joy, like when I get to be around my friends who make music. And then I get moments of sadness when I'm by myself in the dark, mold growing on me, being like, does anybody care? And then I'm like, Becca, go outside. Of course they do. That's on you, bitch. Like, you gotta go outside. You know?
Yeah, we all feel that too. Sitting in the darkness, being like, why don't they care? Is such a shared experience.
Yeah.
That it's like, let's open that door for everybody and be like, hey, we're all in this together.
And
we all
communion.
feel this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful place to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you for spending your morning with us and,
Yeah.
and being so open and sharing so much about your experience with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. You can find more info on this episode, including links to things that we talked about, by going to theother22hours.com and clicking on episodes.
We want this show to be a resource for our community, from our community. So we'd love to hear from you about what works and what doesn't. Please let us know by sending an email to info@theother22hours.com. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.